All right. Good morning, everyone. I hope that you are all in a very warm and comfortable place on this very snowy Monday morning. We thank you for joining with us. Dr. Ford has an excellent talk to share with you entitled Access Denied and Dreams Deferred, How Racially Segregated Gifted Education Programs Disrupt the Pipeline to Higher Education. I hope that you enjoy this presentation. Dr. Ford has done extensive studies and research on gifted and the experiences of Black children in our K-12 school systems, very much as I have, but she's gone much further than I have. So we very much look forward to Dr. Ford. And if you have the ability to share, please let me know. And if you need anything, I will be monitoring the chat. If you want to ask questions, put them in the chat. And then I will stop and interject and have conversation with Dr. Ford as we're moving forward. She is a very interactive speaker, so she will solicit your feedback, and she's very passionate about this topic. So I hope that you enjoy it as much as we do. And thank you for the opportunity for joining in with us, and we will get started. Dr. Ford, are you ready?
I am ready. Very excited. Good morning, everyone. And I repeat what Dr. Beard said. Thank you for joining. We only have an hour, so I just want to jump right in. All right, I see you, Juliana. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. I'm glad we're recording. I am going to move kind of fast on some pieces, but yes, I'm going to ask for your, participation. So I'm putting up my screen right now and sharing. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
Okay, let me try to put this, I'm sorry, you all, let me put this in play mode. Okay, here we go. Okay, so thank you all. And I am, again, very happy to present to you and with you. I want to give an overview of who I am for those who don't know what I do. I mainly focus on the achievement gap, opportunity gap, excess gap, expectation gap. Whatever term you prefer to use, I am indicating that there is a gap, sometimes a gulf between white students and Asian students too, compared to Black and Hispanic students. And by the way, I want to be sensitive. Some of you might use African American for right now. I'm using Black, and some of you might like Latino or Latinx, but I still want to go with Hispanic right now. Okay, but I understand that there are differences. I work with educators or school personnel. I work with families and also work directly with students in the P-12 system as well as higher education. So I'm very concerned about the overrepresentation of Black and Hispanic students in certain categories of special education, and just looked up the term high incidence areas of special education. On the other end of this diagram, which I know is very subliminal, but I am making a statement. I look at gifted and talented education. And when I'm rushing, I'll just call it GATE, G-A-T-E, gifted and talented education, as well as advanced placement, AP classes. The underrepresentation is grave. I am keen. I'm really obsessed with racial identity among minoritized students, and under there I'm including multiracial and biracial individuals. I believe that, and I'll just go ahead and say this, that's another presentation, hint, hint, Dr. Beard. When you love the skin you're in, I think you're invisible, okay? And then I focus on negative peer pressure, which definitely comes with being high performing. Let me just say that for brevity. And I am obsessed with culturally responsive education, which I will talk about in a moment. I think that the majority of educators, and I'm just going to say professionals, so even if you're not in education, I'm still talking about you, that we do not know how to make education, our work environment, culturally responsive. Too often they are culturally assaultive, even when we mean well. So what I've been trying to do for quite a few years, over 30, is to bridge two disciplines. I'm sorry, to bridge two disciplines, and that's gifted education and urban education or multicultural education. I am so sorry, education or multicultural education. And but I'm really focused and honing in on recruitment. How do we desegregate gifted education and higher education? Oh, and advanced placement. And then how do we retain students of color once they have been recruited into those three areas? We must focus on equity. We must focus on potential and talent development. Relationships are essential, as well as expectations. So as I was jumping ahead, I'm saying I'm trying to bridge two fields, and listen carefully, that seldom overlap. One is multicultural or culturally responsive education. I want people to look at Donna and what are my academic needs, cognitive, affective, cultural, etc., as a Black individual. Do not be colorblind. You need to be responsive to who I am as an African American. Then, believe it or not, I was identified as gifted. So what do we know about gifted education, period? So when someone creates a study, writes a paper, does a presentation, and they're talking about gifted students and their cognitive needs or their social needs, in my field, still 2021, it tends to be colorblind. And so I rail against that. And I'm always venting about, are you sure that instrument is culturally responsive and not biased for ELL students? Are you sure that when you talked about negative peer pressures for gifted students, that you included what it means for minoritized students, et cetera? So I call out the field necessary, and this I think is very necessary. And I want these two fields to merge. Not Donna is gifted, but Black. It is Donna is gifted and Black. And those two lenses must be considered so that you can truly help me be all that I can be. No dreams deferred. So just quickly, just a couple of slides on equity. There are so many out there, but I want to, express and reiterate that equality and equity are not the same as this picture indicates. And I like this one because it talks about liberation, and that is empowering minoritized students and individuals to be able to break down barriers that are in their way to achieving their goals and potential. And I believe that in higher education, we definitely have an opportunity to do that, as well as we need to start earlier in P to 12. Break down the barriers. Sometimes people don't get the difference between equality and equity. So I use this picture with the focus on ability to show what the difference between equity at the top, equality at the top, and then equity. So to be equitable, everyone, means that you are being responsive and addressing a need, not a want. A need is essential, a want is not. You can find out more about some of the publications that I've written in terms of equity, especially for students of color or minoritized students. Here's something from 2018. It's a culturally responsive, equity-based Bill of Rights for gifted students of color. And then we modified it for publication in 2020 for the Journal of Minority Achievement, Creativity, and Leadership, and we made it more of an evaluation tool. And it contains 8 sections that have the twin goal of being culturally responsive and equity based. I also want to say that I'm very appreciative of the College of Education, Human Ecology, our Dean, Hope Davis, for allowing me to share my story as a gifted Black high school student. So you can find it on a podcast here as well as on my website, personal website. So as I'm talking, as we're dialoguing, I want you to really give some consideration to what parallels exist between GATE, gifted and talented education, and higher education. I want you to be thinking about demographics. Who's in your classes? Who is on campus or campuses? And don't lump us together, minoritized individuals. You may see one group more than you see another, and that matters. And I'll be talking about that in a moment. Access and admissions criteria or barriers. What about testing? Definitely have something to say about that. Looking at attitudes and beliefs, they're very dangerous. I am very concerned about racism. I'm just putting that out there, and in particular, anti-Blackness in gifted education, advanced placement, and higher education. And then there's almighty exposure and cultural capital or social capital or economic capital. Keep thinking about that as we are dialoguing. The organization that represents gifted students is called the National Association for Gifted Children, NAGC. And they said, this is not the federal definition or federal definitions. We've had several, but this is their definition. And I want to tease this out. So it says students with gifts and talents perform or have the capability to perform at higher levels compared with others of the same age, experience, environment in one or more domains. They require modifications to their educational experiences to learn and realize their potential. So, Dr. Beard, I didn't do this the last time, but I have to do this right now. And in bold and italics, it says compared to others of the same age. We've already always known that there's nothing new about this. So you compare 15-year-olds to, roughly 14, 15, 16-year-olds. You compare, and now it's no longer colorblind or culture blind. You compare individuals from the same experience and environment. So I want you to think about those individuals who live in poverty having to compete with those who are well resourced financially, or their caregivers are professors or doctors or lawyers, you name it, highly educated, upper middle class. You are asking us to compete on the same damn test and get a comparable score. It is not likely to happen. Yes, it happens, but the probability is low. It is not because of genetics. It is not because of nature. It is because of the environment. It is because of nurture. And I hope you all heard me. And I hope there'll be some questions where I can clarify that. So, and it says they require modifications, all right, to reach our potential. And this says modifications, obviously in school, also at home, but sometimes lower families who live in poverty, or those who have a lower education, those who are not proficient yet in English and more, sometimes we just don't know about gifted programs and advanced placement. It's kept a big mystery and secret from us. But those who can evoke their white privilege and their capital, they know who to call. They know where to go. They know what the test that will be used. They know what instrument will be used. They know who the teachers are, who the coordinators are, and more. I got to get off this slide. I can do the whole doggone presentation on this slide because I get angry when I think about what we say versus what we do. On behalf of equity. And so,
Dr. Ford, we have a
yes,
question on this slide before you leave it. There's a question that
okay.
asks, can you speak to the difficulties with standardized testing like ACT and SAT modifications needed or suggestions and the impacts during the pandemic?
Okay, so I have a slide coming up. So
Okay.
can we revisit
So
that
Brenda,
question?
yeah, Brenda, just hold that thought. She's put her thumbs up. She's good.
All right.
And to
And
your
right
point,
on.
and to your point, Dr. Ford, I also chime in here a little bit. It is accurate, you know, not just the nature and nurture piece, but also just the simple exposure. The exposure to language, exposure to travel, the exposure to culture. When you haven't had the opportunity to have that sort of enrichment through exposure, that can become a penalty when you're taking exams or you're sitting shoulder to shoulder with those who have, like you called them, resources, the resourced counterparts or similarly situated
And by
others.
the way, those who have purchased the tests or practice tests
Correct.
or
Correct.
purchase or I'm sorry, or pay for what is it, Dr. Beard?
The
You know,
private tutoring.
test prep.
Yeah.
There you go.
Private tutoring. That's right.
There you go.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so there is no secret that I am angry about the injustices, the inequities, and that I have taken on my field. And I came up with this not too long ago. I call it the National Association for Gifted Caucasians. And I'll share demographics in a moment. There is no federal mandate to fund or identify and serve gifted students. Now, special education does have a federal mandate and et cetera, but we don't. So it's a state by state decision. So you can go to the davidsongifted.org website and you can pull up this gifted state policies and funding resource. Select your state and you will see whether you're one of these 5 categories. But Ohio gifted programs are mandated and partially funded by the state. Now I want you to already start thinking about some inequities. What about those districts that are don't have a lot of funding and resources? They're not likely to have gifted programs or a lot of gifted programs and advanced placement compared to others. And yes, keep in mind the pandemic, which really exposed and exacerbated inequities by race and by income or economics, okay? So in gifted education, many times, and I should have changed this, districts are looking at, or states, the top 2 TWO to 5%. So it's very selective and very elite. Very selective, very elitist. Keep thinking in mind, access, white privilege, and more. So gifted and talented AP and higher education is guilty of this elitism.
Dr. Graves mentioned in the chat that usually people who understand, who have the privilege and understand how to manipulate the system, exercise that privilege and get those SAT and ACT accommodations. So.
Oh, so when so thank you, Dr. Graves. So when we talk about accommodations, my ears perk up and I think about special education, and absolutely, if that is what is meant by accommodations in your remarks. And so definitely with, for example, learning disabilities, which is a high incidence disability, you get more time to take a test. And that is not looked at, meaning LD, learning disabilities, is not looked at in a negative light. And I see more privileged parents fighting for their parents to get that label, to give their children advantages. So there are some some students in P to 12 and higher education who really don't have a learning disability. They have a paid learning disability, a purchased learning disability. So there is corruption. I'm not saying I know the percent, but I've seen it far too often in my 30-something years in education. So yes, accommodations. All right, so in gifted education, there are 5 recognized categories, formally recognized categories. A premium is placed on general intellectual ability. Simply put, what is your IQ score? And the majority want an IQ score on an individual and or group test of 130 and above. 130 and above. And those are just a few characteristics that educators look for when they're saying a child is someone has is gifted in the intellectual area. And one of the things that bothers me about this, there are many, is if you go down almost to the bottom and it says uses a large vocabulary, those students who are ELL learners are often at a serious disadvantage because they don't speak mainstream English. And so when it comes to the teacher thinking they should have gifted education services in that area, this area, I'm sorry, it's a problem. And I want to add, the same happens with those who speak Black English. Teachers too often turn their nose up at those of us, and I said us, I'm being inclusive because I do speak Black English. I'm not doing it now, but I do speak Black English. And so when teachers say they don't understand it, Black English, or what I just said, then it's problematic because it is not a foreign language. If I say I ain't got no pencil, you gotta say, I mean, think about it. What did I just say? You know, I really would like the audience to say something, but if I say he be getting on my nerves, etc. If I say give me that, D-A-T, not that, you know what I'm talking about. So don't pretend like you don't. So we need more educators trained in Black English. For the record, over 85% of Black people speak Black English. I'm not going to call out anybody on this webinar to say, yes, you do or no, you don't. But I'm telling you, I do. And it is almost 11 o'clock, almost. And when this webinar ends, I will go back to speaking Black English. And I feel more comfortable doing that. All right, let me move to.
So I'd like to jump in just 1 second, Donna. Somebody says here, I noticed that our EL students starting averaging a math score equal to or greater than white students once they became trial mainstream or tested out of EL. This suggests that language is a barrier and EL teachers needed gifted education training to better support gifted EL students. We spoke a little bit about this whole language piece before when you brought this up. And I told you my first wake up call was when a student had to read a passage that referred to her grandmother reclining in a chaise lounge. And she came to me and she asked me, why was her grandmother being chased to the corner? And I could not put it together until I talked to her a little bit more and I understood. In my community, where many of, in an urban setting, the lounge is at the corner, it's a bar, that's the lounge. And so when she saw the word lounge, her natural inclination was her context. So phonetically, she sounded out chase, but she didn't know it was chase, it was chase. So she figured someone was chasing the grandmother to the corner. And the language understanding is huge. I can't tell you, you really hit on something there, that and yet higher expectations that Dr. TK is mentioning about having those expectations once you're moved out of a situation and you are hearing the language, then you can learn and have a better understanding in context of what's being asked of you. I also mentioned too, one of the things that the students have to do in the medical training that they're going through is learn Latin, because they have to know the language. The language of medicine is heavily Latin, and that's true in religion. You have to learn the language. So thank you for that, and thank you, TK.
Yeah.
Oh, Dorinda's saying something.
And I remember.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Who was saying something?
Oh, I thought Dorinda was saying something to draw my attention. Dorinda, is there something you wanted to say further?
Oh, I'm sorry. When Donna was talking about speaking speaking Black English, and she said she didn't want to put anyone on the spot. I just put it in there that I do as well.
Oh,
So I
gotcha.
speak Black English as well.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. And yeah, so I remember years ago, and it may still be available on the internet, but I do mean like 15 years ago, seeing that the FBI was hiring people who spoke Black English. They were specifically looking for Black English speakers. And that is a whole nother discussion because they wanted their what? Their agents to be able to understand what was being said, and, and ultimately, of course, to be safe and be effective at their job in certain communities. So this is real. This is real. And I do consider us in some way ELL learners and or bilingual. This is fantastic. Let's take a note of this and maybe we can dig into it in a whole nother webinar with the other professors here and so forth. Okay, so that is the prize. That's the badge of honor, IQ. And it's a badge of honor that families put a bumper sticker on. My child goes to this school or has this IQ. There's an obsession. Anyway, specific academic ability. What I really want you to notice about this is it says specific. So it's math or language arts. Is language arts or science, etc. It's not all of those for content areas, 1, 2, or more. And the one that bothers me about this one, it says widely read in special area of interest. And there are still implications for not just higher education, but these various tests that we take in higher education and in P to 12, all right? So SAT, ACT, with your example, Dr. Beard, being one. But when it says widely read, what about those who live in book deserts, who live in library deserts, who don't have multicultural literature in their schools? And if they do, we're in Black History Month, right? Teachers have dusted off those books and they're very dated, is problematic. So how can you be widely read in your area if there's nothing that interests you or the availability is not there? Creativity is one of my favorites. I want you, if you're interested, and I would love to see a thesis or a dissertation on this from someone, from some of the students, but creative and productive thinking is where, if Black students are identified well, it's in this area. So we are seen as comedians, as entertainers, as funny, as being able to think outside the box. Look up the work of E, the letter E, the initial E, I'm sorry, E. Paul Torrance, considered the father of creativity. And he is the one who, he's passed away, but even to this day, he's done more on children who live in poverty and Black children who are creative than others. And he has found that Black children and those who live in poverty are more creative and productive in our thinking than the more privileged individuals. We have to make a way out of no way. We see things that others do not see. We know how to be very resourceful, very resourceful. And if I were doing a presentation on creative and productive thinking, I would show you a whole bunch of examples. All right, but we are not, and I don't have time. I want to say this. Robert Sternberg, who is one of the theorists in gifted education. I'm pleased, I just had an opportunity to write a chapter, anyway, write something with him. No, it's an article, and it's about inequities in gifted education. In fact, we took on Terman in the field of testing. Louis Terman, the father of eugenics, and we took this on, so I'm looking forward to it coming out soon. But anyway, he said, if you give an intellectually gifted child a problem, they will solve it. Creatively gifted children or individuals find problems to be solved. We have the most impact on this society, but it's not recognized because we don't have a high IQ score because the tests are biased. Then there's leadership. Let me just wrap this up. I always think about gang leaders. They have the same characteristics listed on this short list, but you don't see them being served. What if, just imagine if we took the time to nurture just those skills that you see among gang leaders or the bully in the classroom or just a student who is so persuasive. Just imagine how, the impact that these individuals could have in society. Well, we don't. So there is an issue of equity there. And visual and performing arts, that's really not very controversial. All right, so we are identified as musicians and actors and etc. You should have this as your go-to for data. Condition of Education 2020. And in it, it has almost everything you want to know about education. So here you can find public school enrollment, your information for charter schools, and it's by race, too, and private schools, public school enrollment, and ELL learners. But I just want to highlight this one as of 2017 and just emphasize that as of, I think it was 2011, the year my grandson was born, that was the first time that the majority of babies born in that year were non-white. So I just want you all to know that, to be blunt, we cannot be colorblind, and there is no running from us. We are here. We're here to stay, and it's not in just society at large. It's in education and all other disciplines that we
Dr.
need to
Ford,
be totally responsive. Yes.
if you could jump back to that one slide, I'd like to capture that website and put it in the chat. And then
Absolutely.
OCR data.
So condition of education, let me say this, condition of education 2020, it's best that you Google that, because every March, I'm sorry, the newest data come out. So in next month, then you should be able to get 2021. But I'm also going to be using data from OCR. So ocrdata.ed.gov, okay? So that's two different sources for you, but this one comes from condition of education.
I put it in the chat. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at higher education. I got this one from Eric, and it also really comes from condition of education. So here's a screenshot about representation trends in undergraduate, higher education. And you see very low numbers for the minoritized individuals. Okay, so I want to highlight this. I am repulsed by the term alien to refer to human beings. And if you had never thought about it, I hope that this has sparked something in you that you will not use this term and you will speak up when human beings are called aliens. I want to share 2013 data. I have someone helping me calculate the more recent data from OCR, which is 2017, just came out about maybe 3 months ago, but it's district by district and state by state. So it's taken time for me to write it up and publish it, but there's not much change. Here it indicates that white students are 49% of schools in 2013. However, 62% of gifted education, overrepresented. You will see the same for Asian students who were 5% of schools, but represent 10% of gifted programs. Now, this does not include advanced placement. Black students are 19% of schools here in 2013, but only 10% of gifted education. And there you see Hispanic students, 25% versus 16. So this bar chart shows inequities. I've calculated the degree to which this is problematic. So just quickly, Black students during this time were underrepresented by 47%, and Hispanic students were underrepresented by 36%. I want to put this on the record. Every single year that the Office for Civil Rights has has posted this data, Black students have been the most underrepresented, followed by Hispanic students. So when you go to OCR's website, ocrdata.ed.gov, you will see this screen. So you could do a search by school district or a specific school, school you went to, not just the district, but the building you attended. And you can look at detailed reports, but down at the bottom, oh, I'm sorry, you can look at special reports, the fourth one. And then down at the bottom are the state and national estimates that I just showed you, and I'm calculating for more recent data. Ohio data. All right, representation in gifted programs. Here is what it is for students without disadvantage. Let's just look at the last year. So for 2018-19 in Ohio, those students who were higher income were 50% of schools. However, almost 78% of gifted programs, overrepresentation. I'm going to say again, this is not about nature. This is about nurture. Students who are low income are 50% of our schools. However, only 22% of gifted programs. Your jaw should drop. Your equity meter should rise. You should be upset. Look at the inequities, the severe, indefensible underrepresentation for those who live in poverty. White students, 69% of our state, but 80, I'm just going to round up everyone, 84% of gifted programs, overrepresentation. Asian students, 2.5% of Ohio schools, however, 4.8% of gifted programs, overrepresentation. And by the way, more people need to talk about which Asian students are the most overrepresented. It is not, well, we can talk about that maybe with the question and answer, but it's not every group, it's certain groups. And it's mainly those who immigrate to the US who are very well off, highly educated, and more. When you look at Black students, of all the populations, Black students are the most underrepresented. Now, I'm just going to get casual here. This should piss you off. This should make you angry. This should outrage you like it does me. This should impassion you to do more in the name of equity and justice. So we are about 17% of Ohio and only 4.6% of gifted programs. Hispanics, 6% versus 2.8%. Severe underrepresentation, inequitable. Multiracial, 5%, 5.3%, I'm sorry, excuse me, 5.4% versus 4.2%. American Indian or Alaska Native, 0.12 versus 0.09. So slight underrepresentation, but it's equitable. I see I need to move a little faster, I'm sorry. And then Pacific Islander, 0.09 versus 0.05. So about, what's that, 40% underrepresentation? So advanced placement, I knew I would run out of time. Let me just say it's even worse. So I didn't put up data for AP, but I'm happy to have discussions about that. It's even worse. So with this in mind, I am so pleased that Booker and Castro not too long ago introduced a bill aimed to increase the enrollment of underrepresented students in advanced courses and programs. So if you look this up, and $800 million are available for schools to do what is right to change those numbers in the name of equity. I highly endorse it. So you might be saying, well, why does underrepresentation exist? So the four faculty who've spoken up have, shared just a little, but let's dive into it. So the number one issue is racism, anti-Blackness, deficit thinking among educators. They are the gatekeepers. If teachers or counselors or administrators don't refer you, you have a low probability of ever being identified as gifted. Now go back to what we've been saying. You speak Black English and a teacher has a disdain for it. Nope, because one of the first signs they look for is your speaking prowess. So now Donna speaks Black English, or I don't understand what she's saying, which really you do. But anyway, I don't understand what she's saying. And so she's not that smart. She can't even speak mainstream English. And when it comes to referral, no. Then we can say the same with school counselors who are gatekeepers, and especially for advanced placement. All right, deficit thinking. Issues with tests. So I know you're on top of this, Dr. Graves, as well as you, Dr. Beard, but test performance and policies and issues. Yes, I believe in test bias. And then why did you choose that particular test? And have you considered stereotype threats? What modifications are being made? Now, you might get an instrument in that child's language. You might have an interpreter. Those are just two examples. But again, I want to say that does not happen with Black students speaking Black English. And then, if there is an interpreter, they usually speak Spanish. I'm sorry, what about those who speak a different language? All right, when can a test be used? What are the cutoff scores? Why do you only test at one grade level or one time a year? Why don't you use standard error of measure? Listen, everyone, I am telling you, I have hundreds and hundreds, let's put thousands of examples of students, mainly Black or Hispanic, who are in a district where to be identified as gifted, you have to have an IQ of 130, but they get a 128 or a 129. The district says they're not gifted. What the hell is going on when we're talking about a 2-point issue? That is within the 7 to 6 point standard error of measure. But if you don't want us in your program, you will not use the standard error of measure. And more. And there are administrators who are guilty of acquiescing to the status quo and acquiescing to those who have power. We just saw it with the hearing for impeachment. The Republican senators. Need I say more?
Indeed, the backlash is real, and people, leaders buckle down to it, teachers buckle down to it. This slide is really very powerful. I'm glad you included Claude Steele. I've been working on his work for decades, actually. And Yvonne said something actual too in the chat. She says, regarding test bias, there's no such thing as an objective assessment. Not IQ tests, not standardized tests. Someone created the tests, and their biases are inherent in the design and the questions. This is a major reason why we need to stop relying on standardized assessments as indicative of performance or capability. They are by design racially biased. Who created these assessments and who do they benefit? So if they are inherently subjective, and they are, there should be no issue using any subjective assessment because they are all subjective. To your point, Yvonne, and going back to what Donna had mentioned about AP and what I have talked about for years, the company that creates SAT, ACT also does AP. So if you don't have AP, if you don't have some AP experience, you don't know the language that's on the test, period. Mm-hmm. And you would not know how to contextualize what's on there. The other part of that is the understanding that the algorithms that go into the test framing. So if a student answers a particular question in a particular way, the algorithm within the design signals for bias. So understand that these are real factors. These are real. And I've heard, and I haven't confirmed this yet, but I've heard that you cannot get a perfect score on the law exam if you identify as African American. So that's part of the algorithm. Now, those are things you need to be thinking about when we're talking about all these tests. Jenna says, oh, she also agreed with the Steele score. Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry, Donna, continue. This is a great slide.
I want the students on here to really digest what is being said, not just by me, but you are hearing the experiences, personal and professional, of other professors on here. And so I'm going to make a pitch. Professors on here, let's get in touch. Let's write some more on this. This is why having this, Dr. Beard, is so important, because then we get to really know each other.
Right. And that was the point.
But let's collaborate. Okay.
Will do.
And by the way, I've not done justice to this slide. I really would love to delve into it. There's just no time, but
it's a great slide.
Being recorded, and keep thinking about this. It's real.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah, we have about 15 more minutes, so we want to be able to give a chance, just a little, give and take if we can. So I'll stop interrupting you. How about that?
No, you interrupt, please. And by the way, I've always believed we're going to do what's called CP time, colored people's time, being polychronic. If we have to go over by 10 minutes, let's just do it. Okay. All right. Okay. But I hope everybody on here got what I just said. Okay. Okay. So in every single study on teacher referral of students for gifted programs, 100%, no exception, under-referred Black students, even when we have the same test scores and grades, even when we have the same income level, even when our parents have the same educational level, etc. It does not matter. The Black students are the least likely to be referred for gifted. Hispanic students, 50% of the studies show under referral by teachers. And when I say teachers, I'm sorry, I'm rushing now. I mean, just, educators. And then students in poverty are not likely to be referred. This bottom part just says that students who live in poverty represent about 50 to 60% of our nation's schools, but only 10% of gifted programs. I want to say this. Never mind. Let me keep going. Okay, so here, I love this diagram. It says, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. So the test that is selected matters. As Dr. Beard just said, the instructions matter. The terminology matters, and more and more. It's already been stated, but yes, and this was a question I said we come back to. I don't know if was it Yvonne? I forgot who the person was, but thinks we've answered the question. But IQ tests, which are highly verbal, and achievement tests, which are used to identify gifted students, they're analogous. All right, they're highly correlated with SAT and ACT. So there you have it. So I want you to consider degree of cultural loading. And by the way, it means white culture, higher income culture. Dr. Beard gave an example of that. And I know that others could give examples from testing, all right? But the test questions and the situation, they're familiar to higher and more privileged, economically privileged individuals. So Dr. Beard already gave that with the use of lounge, okay? So I won't belabor it. And that's just one example. And then degree of linguistic demand. Again, this verbal piece. Intelligence test, the majority of the content is verbal. And if it's an individual test, you actually speak. So it's just not, the wording. But there's one I want to show you, and I think it's a double whammy. Cultural loading and then linguistic. And it says, how are work and play alike? And so listen to this. The answer is something like, they're both something you enjoy. Well, what if you are a sanitation worker? We need them. but they're not just going home talking about how happy they are cleaning up our garbage and our stench, you know, the smell, the maggots in the summer, etc. So just think about certain professions. And right now, if we think about COVID, what is the term you all, the essential workers? Think about essential workers. Think about those who cleaned up after the White House insurrection. They were Black, and people had feces and urine and more. We cleaned that up. Black people cleaned that up. You think they went home talking about how much they love their damn job? Whew. Moving on. So this diagram is just a test bias, learning style, education at home and school, teacher credentials, test taking conditions, test wiseness, test taking skills, vocabulary, expectations, your health. A lot of children who live in poverty come to these tests and they're sick. They're unhealthy. They have a toothache and can't afford to get their teeth, worked on. Oh, and more. All right. So don't give us this garbage, this mumbo jumbo that these highly privileged individuals with these high IQs were born with it. Environment. Dr. Beard, I'm rushing again. All right, so I want you to read up on McFadden versus Illinois Board of Education, District U46. This is a court case where I was the expert witness. And I helped the I helped the plaintiffs, McFadden, win this court case that ended in 2010. I was blackballed from many of the powerful people in the field of gifted education for this court case. But they tried, they did not defeat me and still won't. The judge ruled that the district intentionally and unintentionally discriminated against Hispanic students in gifted education. He called them minorities, but this was primarily about Hispanic. This district spent $18 million not to have Hispanic students in gifted classes with white students. So they had two separate programs, racially identifiable, and SWAT means school within a school, and SET means Spanish English transition. So this was in grades 4 to 6. When it came to, and you had to get into the gifted program with teacher referrals, but when it came to getting into the middle school, SWAS program, SWAS no longer existed. When it came to get into middle school gifted program, guess what? They automatically admitted white students and retested Hispanics. And they retested them with the COGAT rather than the Naglieri nonverbal ability test, because they knew the Hispanic students would score lower on the COGAT, cognitive ability test, than a nonverbal measure. And Dr. Graves can speak to nonverbals. So in that court case, and in dozens and dozens and dozens of districts and states have helped districts set minimum ranges that are equitable. So you take the group and you say time 0.8, and you get the minimum representation that should exist versus the maximum. You do 1.2. So take the group and multiply it times 1.2. This formula is used by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to look at discrimination in employment. So it's not my formula, which people say it is, it's their formula. So using this formula, and I'm looking at the time, everyone, Hispanic students, instead of being 16% of gifted programs, they should be a minimum of 20. If they are not 20, then underrepresentation exists. It is inequitable and it is intentional. Please hear me, intentional. Human-made barriers. For Black students, we should be not 10% of our nation's gifted programs. At minimum, we should be 15.2. So for anybody studying law, this is not a quota. A quota means Black students are 19% of school. There should be 19% of gifted education, AP, higher education, etc. All right. So it's not a quota. And we know how to set minimum and maximum, and we can use the same formula in special education. Everyone, I hope you heard that, and for all categories of special ed. So over 500,000 Black and Hispanic students being denied access. So I'm going to have to end with this slide. So when you say, well, why do you have this allowance, this 20% allowance, which is what I call it, a 20% allowance? Economic disparities, we've already talked about it. Education disparities, teacher quality, teacher turnover, teacher expectations, and more. Language differences, family education and resource differences, racial and ethnic discrimination, lack of access, such as digital divide, and now we can talk about summer and school loss with COVID. That's just a small list, but this is about nurture, not nature. These are external experiences. So there are barriers. Deficit thinking, the less we know about Black children, the more we make up, or Black people. You see this all the time with police brutality and more. So put the other, you fill in the group. College admissions, you see it, lies, bribery, test preparation. And they get a slap on the wrist with those prison sentences, if they even got any. All right, we're here. What parallels do you see between gifted education, gifted intelligent education and higher education in terms of demographics, access, testing, attitudes, beliefs, resources, and opportunities? And then I want you to be connecting this to whatever your discipline or specific area of interest is as a student, a staff, a faculty member, and administrator. Dr. Beard, all right.
Yes, that's awesome. Hold on, I understand you did a great job winding it up, and we got to keep going for a little bit longer. Go back to your other slide where you posed those questions, because there's a couple of questions that have been posed that I think are worth talking about. Tori says, I'm sorry, not Tori. Dr. TK says, can we reverse that formula to determine overrepresentation in special ed, which in fact is so very valid and true. I think that the sparse numbers that you see in gifted and special ed, they are overrepresented for sure. Go ahead, Donna.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I forgot who asked that question, but you are right on, and I said it, I just went too quickly. So with special ed, you use the same formula, but especially you use the maximum. So you take the group and you say time, hold on. Oh my goodness. Okay, forget it. Time 1.2. I should not have done this. All right, time 1.2. So you're looking at overrepresentation. So if Black students are 19% of the schools, you say 19 times 1.2, that should be the maximum. You are on it. Yes, so you use this in gifted education. I said do it for entire special education. I'm sorry, do it for the entire special education numbers, but then do it for all, 13, 14 categories of special education, especially high incidence areas like learning disability, like emotional and behavioral disorders, and there are other, intellectually disabled or intellectual disabilities, which used to be called MR. I don't want to use that phrase. So absolutely, use this formula for minimum and maximum of anything, employment practices. Oh, there it was. I'm sorry. Yeah, so then you could calculate the minimum and maximum. So now I just use ranges.
So Carissa also says, do you think that if schools gave the NNAT as their universal screener, the overall percentage of gifted in Ohio would decrease, since most white students are not visual spatial thinkers, but rather more verbal? Or is looking at the nonverbal score on the COGAT alone enough to identify underrepresented populations?
Dr. Graves, are you still on here? So, if he's muted and is still on here.
Dr. Ford, yes, I'm here.
Do you want to respond to that? Because I certainly have something to say. Am I putting you on the spot? Do you
You
want to
know, can she
respond?
repeat that? Can she repeat the question?
Okay.
It's in the chat. Carissa Spitzer says, do you think if schools gave the NNAT as their universal screener, the overall percentage of gifted in Ohio would decrease, since most white students are not visual spatial thinkers, but rather more verbal? Or is it looking at the nonverbal score on the COGAT alone enough to identify underrepresented populations?
All that sounds good, but we have a human element. If you look at the numbers of, I just talk about Black children. That's the kids I focus on. We don't have enough Black school psychologists, and so a lot of these individuals have the same biases that we see, in the general public. So it doesn't matter really what test you use. There are always ways around the test. Dr. Ford mentioned earlier that there's so many individuals who aren't really have a learning disability, but the parents make sure they find the right psychologist to text their kids. Same thing with this test. Until we have more monitoring and evaluate kids
Yes.
equitably, you could throw a million different tests out there and the results aren't going to be exactly the same. So no matter what situation you put a lot of these kids in, they're not thriving, not because they're not smart. They're not thriving because of people around them. So I don't think the test will make a whole lot of difference. It could in certain situations if you have monitoring, like this court case Dr. Ford
Yes.
mentioned. But without the providers in place, the culturally responsive providers, they'll just find a way to rig that game too.
Ah, there you go. Rig this game, rig the system. So let me just add this, and I just know we're out of time. But
I know you are, Donna. I want to add one thing before you wind us down. Hold on,
Okay.
if you don't mind. Donna spoke very, very passionately about the court case that she was on, and she and I share that although we have benefited from the education system, both of us being gifted and students who were able to access AP, we've seen so many who were not, and especially in my case, my own children, and I was paying for their education. So I really changed that whole game up. So it's not that I'm turning on my field, I am educating my field. I feel like I am pushing my field to do better and stronger. One of the things she mentioned was the court case, and I cite Frances Fowler very often on page 5 of her text. She says that and it's a civil rights case that was here in Columbus, Ohio. It was called the Pinnock case, and it was a desegregation case. And the reason they won, the reason the families won against the school district is because the policies were enacted as government expressions of their intentions, which is what Donna was getting at. When you don't do what you're supposed to do, or you delay doing what you're supposed to do, you can be held legally bound. And that is exactly what happened in most of the desegregation cases. It wasn't because of their patterns of activity, it was because of their patterns of inactivity, because they didn't do enough. So keep that in mind as you're moving through your education programs, not only just the programs, but as you take positions in the field, you want to alert your administration, you want to alert your faculty, your colleagues, that the patterns that are being created, if you're consistently keeping Black and brown children out of programs to advance their quality of life, then you are in violation of the civil rights.
Absolutely, and this as a pipeline again to higher education for what we're talking about. For that last question, I want to add also. I am an advocate of nonverbal measures. I don't just believe that looking at a nonverbal subscale on a test will improve things, because it depends on how that nonverbal items have been constructed and more. And last thing that I want to say is white students do well on nonverbal measures, and they do well on verbal measures. It's just that Black and Hispanic students tend not to do well on the verbal. We tend to do better on the nonverbal. So whatever test you choose, I'm gonna go back to my last 2 colleagues, it doesn't matter. White students are going to be advantaged, especially if they are privileged white students. And we got to consider what the cutoff score, when the test was used. In Elgin District U46, the district tested students right after summer, knowing about summer loss. It was intentional. we could do an entire session on
Yeah.
testing.
Yeah.
Listen to your colleagues, your faculty, I'm sorry, professors, an entire session. So the time we're over time.
Yeah,
I don't know if there's something else.
we are over by 5 minutes.
Oh, it's just
I
fine.
still
Okay.
want to offer 5 minutes. Yeah, I still want to offer 5 minutes for the students and visiting faculty or anyone else who wants to say something or chime in. We're going to open up the mic now. So if you have something you want to share, you can either raise your hand, or if you want to unmute, just try not to talk over one another. That would be very helpful. Any questions for Dr. Ford or commentary? All right, hearing none, I then hope that she has given you much food for thought. And as you continue in your studies, because I know we have a lot of undergraduate FEEP students I'm seeing on here, as well as graduate students and faculty. So if you have any other questions or comments, reach out to any one of us, but most especially to Donna. Someone said something earlier in the chat about having just been introduced to Steele's work. Yeah, if you look at my website, I have a lot of writings that I use of Steele's, as well as Francis Fowler, the one I responded to earlier. If you wouldn't mind, just unmute so that we can thank Dr. Ford, give her a round of applause in our own way. There you go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You all.
Yeah, for
Thank
your
you.
time, Donna, we couldn't pay you enough, so we thank you. And we also love your passion, but we're always concerned, just I want you to breathe, but it gets a little bit to you. Okay, all right. I'm here to check you, sis.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, thank you all so very much. Thank you for coming. Have a great day and stay warm.
Yes.
One other thing, there was a question about how these would be available. I do need to make these available, but they'll be available through the department head. So I'll share that later. Thanks again, Donna. Many blessings, lady.
Okay,
Hello.
thanks everyone. All right, take care.
If
Bye-bye.
you still have time, I do have a question. I'm gonna turn on my camera so you can see me. Give me just a moment.
Is this Sasha?
Hi.
Okay. Hi.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi.
So I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. I went to a predominantly white high school and middle school and elementary school. And I noticed that like a lot of times when Arab or Middle Eastern students were like checking off papers, we had to check off white. And oftentimes those students were like ESL students where they didn't speak a lot of English, or they were students who had a different cultural background. How do we fit into this? Because I know that like a lot of our experiences are very different from white students, but we still have to check off the box that says white.
Okay, I think this, thank you for sharing this, Sasha, and I think it's quite unfortunate and unjust that you have to do that. And I said earlier, I study racial identity as well. So in spite of someone boxing you in like this, we have to be more vocal and speak up about how we do identify despite the federal boxes and categories. And so you cannot do it like officially, but you can certainly do it in, personally and professionally. So, share, you tell people how you want to be identified. Don't let them tell you until this changes, and it needs to change.
That's a great question, Saja. And a lot of students who are mixed race also struggle with this because they are in identifying as Black, feel like they are not including the other parent, and as identifying as white, they feel like they are alienating, a parent. So they choose not to identify. The number of unidentified students has increased in the last 10 years, almost tenfold. for that very reason. They don't want to have to be boxed into an identity that doesn't really represent who they are or their experiences. That's a great question. Thank you.
Absolutely. So social justice, take it on. Write
Yeah.
about it. Speak
I've
about it.
definitely been trying.
Mhm.
Thank
I
you
know
so
that like on
very
a
much.
lot of federal papers, I'll check off other, or
Yeah,
I'll write in Middle Eastern, or
Yeah.
I'll check off
Yeah.
Asian because technically Middle Eastern people are
You
Asian.
are
they're not
Asian,
white.
right?
Yeah.
But it's not very specific to my experience.
Right.
You're
Yeah.
right. Mhm. So unfortunate. So wrong.
Thank you, Saja. That's powerful. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anybody
Have a
else
great
as
one.
we're continuing to sign off? All right. Well, Juliana, thank you for bringing your team. I see you were talking to them in the chat, so we appreciate them and all of the rest of you that were able to come. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting the VEEP students. I really
Yeah,
do.
it was great. They're welcome. And moving forward, we are going to open this up a little bit more, Juliana, just because there's been such a request. So I will keep you posted. Make sure that when we get in our diversity committee meetings, that's where I'm first going to figure out how we're going to disperse the recordings to, and you can make those available to them also.
Perfect. That would be
Thanks
great.
again, Donna. Take
All
good
right,
care.
y'all.
Thank you all.
Okay. Bye now.
Have a good rest of your
Okay.
day.
Bye.
Thank you.